So want to welcome everyone to today's session. Very excited to have Lisa Ashcraft from Sprig and Monish from Mode. We'll do some intros here in a minute, but today we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, but really with a focus on maximizing customer satisfaction. How do we engage customers in a way that we can help take care of them, delight them, but also do it efficiently and effectively? And how do we do it at different types of companies, different stages of companies? Before we get started, I want to thank Athena for sponsoring and helping get this webinar launched today. Athena is an application layer that goes on top of Slack to help you manage customers in Slack channels as well as your internal channels. So thank you, Athena, for taking care of today's webinar. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see our faces, and would love to just start with Lisa, a little bit about your background. And really what I'm interested in is you've had an interesting journey from big company, Cisco, to medium-sized company, Dropbox, to smaller company and smaller company. And you've kind of had an interesting journey with different sales motions, customer success motions, and customer engagement models at each of the companies. Tell us a little bit about your journey. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of where you're at today and a little bit about Sprig.
Well, thanks. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to get to connect with you again, Mike, and get to spend time with Monish and Govind. The journey does, as you've described, starts out from larger to smaller, and it also traverses multiple domains. So I started out as more of an IP telephony engineer. So I started out in the telecom side of the house in my career, which taught me a lot about service providers. And in a lot of ways, telco is the original SaaS provider, right? It's a mechanism by which you can turn the commodity on and off. And so that taught me a lot. At the time, I was part of a large enterprise IT organization, worked my way as service manager into an enterprise architect. And so that taught me a lot about up and down the stack, how IT was purchased, the decisions that went into it, the shape of the enterprise, some of the dynamics of larger enterprise. And after about 11 years, I transitioned into engineering, which I had no business doing, but I did anyway. And I learned a ton about UX, UI, what you click, where you click, what color should it be. So I learned about making software. What is the discipline of software development? How does it work? And it created empathy for the admin. Having been in IT as an admin, making software for an admin, I went over to Dropbox, again, making a transition I probably had no business doing, but zigged and zagged over into a customer-facing role where I stood up the first customer success organization and built out the service partner program with my colleagues and developed scale training. So I learned a lot about customer success and what it's like to be inside of a B2C and a B2B company, and the difference in the motions of sales sold versus self-serve. A lot of the different ways the budgets work, the comparisons, the economics, and took those lessons with me over to Postman, where we built out another customer success team. And now here at Sprig, where it gives me the opportunity to sort of bring all of those worlds together, working with product managers, user researchers, designers, even CX professionals, as well as marketing professionals, to help them with their sentiment program and the way they get qualitative research at scale.
Cool. And so at Sprig, tell us about your role and kind of how CS and support kind of all fit in together to your role and what the team looks like.
Sure. What I will share with folks that are starting out when you're designing customer success is to understand that they come in different shapes and sizes, and it really depends on how the organization is performing from a market fit. What do they need? Are they self-serve? Are they sales sold? Are they doing both? And so I'd argue if your company has a self-serve motion, you're going to need to invest in product support. And that was my recommendation to Ryan, our founder and CEO, is that to the degree we have a free plan, and at the time what we called an essentials and now call starter, that we have these self-serve plans, you need to have a really strong product support. And what I mean by that is the reactive motion. So I'm responsible for the technical documentation as well as product support. In the event that either your marketing doesn't answer their question, or maybe there's a miss inside of the product, right? We want to lead with the product, but they might still have a question. And so really thinking through standing up, how do you answer their questions at scale via the technical docs? How do you answer their questions quickly, meeting them where they are when they have a question, whether that's in-app or in Slack or wherever they may be. But then also, if you have that sales sold motion and you have higher value customers, there is a different proactive element that they may come to expect or need depending on the product. So within Sprig, I'm responsible for the 3 functions: the classic customer success, that proactive motion for your largest, most strategic customers, but as well as that reactive motion where maybe people need a little bit of help with the product, they're on a lower value plan or a free plan, and they can still gain access to and get their questions answered or get help in any way that they need. It could be billing, it could be how-to, it could be operational, and it could even be commercial routing, right? Someone raises their hand and says, oh, I want some more of this. You can actually get some of those product qualified leads out to the sales team or out to the customer success proactive motion.
I love it. So I do want to come back to the tech docs. I want to come back to the
Sure.
proactive motion and the reactive motion that you have set up at Sprig. But first, Monish, would love to hear a little bit about your story and what your role at Mode entails, and a little bit about Mode, just for those that aren't familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here, Mike. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I feel a little jealous of Lisa's life story because mine's not so varied and colorful. And now I'm thinking I should, probably should have diversified just like in stocks. Why I say that is because, in the last 17, 18 years that I've been working, most of my time has been spent in customer support and a little bit of customer success. Really quick, I guess, 60-second summary of that is I started my career in a support organization for a CRM company, interestingly, and we were actually competing with Salesforce, which now when I look back is kind of like one of the best things that could have probably happened to me, because we were kind of like eating your own dog food of sorts, because we were making a ticketing system, we were supporting it, we were using it. And you can't think of a much better support organization to work for because you're using the tool that you're making and supporting as well. So I spent around 8-9 years with them. Kind of grew into that management role of sorts. Expanded the team into our Florida office, and then I kind of took a turn, moved into customer success for a couple of years. I was a CSM for some of our customers for a company called Saba, which is actually now Cornerstone. I think they got acquired a couple of years back. And then since then, I've been in customer support management roles. I work for a backup and a disaster recovery company called Axient. And then I spent some time with LinkedIn and then Microsoft. LinkedIn, it was interesting. It was not a customer focused role. I was more on the product quality side of it, which is very interesting because, at least back in the day when I was with LinkedIn, product quality, as the name would typically imply, is not part of engineering. It's actually part of customer support. And people don't realize that because we just use the LinkedIn platform so much. That's, for us, it's just a consumer side thing. So my team was actually responsible for every module of LinkedIn, like the messaging piece, your news feed, and all of that stuff. So we were, in a sense, tier 3 support. And then after that, I was with Microsoft for a bit. I was heading up a startup that Microsoft acquired. I was responsible for the customer support team there. And then most recently, I've been at Mode. I'm the director of support for Mode. And specifically at Mode, so what we do is, we are a modern business intelligence platform. We're built around data teams. Essentially, what we do as a company, as a software, is we try to unify your company's analytics. We basically bring in your data and business teams together. And essentially, Mode becomes kind of like your central hub for anything related to companies, analysts, data teams, business teams to work together. And it just becomes a competitive advantage. Like for me, day to day, like what I use it for is, like, we've got, I think we were chatting about it last week, like we've got Intercom, which we use for our ticketing. We've got Salesforce as our CRM. We have GitHub. We've got Jira. We've got Marketo. And Mode sits at the center, connects to all of these enterprise systems, and then I can see ticketing information submitted by a customer, bugs they've submitted, the revenue that's getting impacted, all in one system, as opposed to just going to 5 different places to get that. So yeah, so that's what Mode does, and I have a global support team at Mode. We just started expanding internationally as well. So yeah.
Cool. And you touched on something which we'll come back to later, which is in today's world, it's not just one channel in which you're engaging customers. There's a lot of different channels, whether it's your website, email, Slack, and web portals, et cetera, inside of your in-app experience as well. So we'll come back to that. But we talked a little bit about this the other day, talking about CSAT and NPS and who owns what. How do you define each? Would love your opinion on this first, Monish, and then Lisa, would love to hear your thoughts on it as well. How do you view those? How are they the same? How are they different? Who owns what?
Yeah, so a very interesting, debatable question, because traditionally CSAT has always been, at least in my experience, traditionally CSAT has always been owned by customer support, right? And I think that is the right place for it to be in, because customer support can drive the CSAT or be accountable for it. Though I think where it makes a difference is when we start breaking down CSAT into what it's actually for, right? And by that, what I mean is like not just like your typical question of how happy were you with the level of service that you got, right? As opposed to like if you were happy, what was it? Was it the service? And then you try to break it down into the product specific modules so that it becomes more actionable insights for the rest of your organization, like product engineering, etc. Right? We've even found some good tidbits we can find in terms of deployment of customers. Like in CSAT, we get feedback about how customers were badly deployed, and we try to make up for that in the next time we implement a customer. And I'm of the belief that CSAT is probably I'll say it controversially, I guess. The CSAT is like a thing of the past. It's outdated because people have begun to expect CSAT. Customer satisfaction is just something that people have begun to expect. I think customer delight is what people are going for, right? I think people just want ease of use, quick solutions, and reduce the number of touch points they have to have with teams, right? With their vendors. From an NPS and
on that, how would you measure customer delight? Would you still use typical CSAT scores, or would you measure it in some other way?
Yeah, so right now at Mode we have CSAT, but we've tried it slightly differently at LinkedIn. We used to do something called as a product health score, which is basically not just your CSAT, but CSAT is interestingly becomes like one of the variables that contributes into a product quality health score, right? Okay. And what that means is that now support's contribution is CSAT. We also have engineering's contribution in terms of probably like, how many bugs do we have open? And that becomes another indicator for your product health. And we've got different elements coming in from different pieces of the organization. And then we have a scale in which you rank your product quality. And that becomes like, not just for support, but for at an organization level, if you're, you obviously set what your product health number should be. And if you're below that, you got to work towards it. So that becomes like a number that the whole organization can rally towards.
And is that because with CSAT, you might be requesting it only at certain moments, like after somebody has a support ticket, and then they might be either more negatively or positively inclined, and they might just be thinking about that experience rather than the holistic usage of your product?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. And that's exactly the problem we have with CSAT. And that's also the problem that we have with NPS too, right? Because, when you do an in-app NPS or a CSAT is traditionally done when you close a ticket. And then when you do an NPS, it can depend on when you send NPS, right? Maybe the customer is not even interacting with support. They're just playing around on the product, and the customer suddenly gets an NPS survey all of a sudden, right? With CSAT, yeah, that's a problem, right? Because we've had this challenge ourselves where we actually get like a really bad CSAT on a ticket, and then we struggle to find out what was the bad CSAT about. Like sometimes you have to scour through the ticket to actually get down to the bottom of it.
Yeah, because in theory, it could be just experience with the product. You said something the other day, CSAT starts as soon as you start utilizing the product rather than just the interaction on the support. you. Lisa, would love to get your thoughts on this, on CSAT as a whole, on some of the things Monish said, especially around customer delight and product utilization and product quality scores. What are your thoughts?
We have a lot of opinions on this at Sprig. And so what I would share with you is that we see a lot of folks starting out with NPS, like would you prefer? And in industry, I think it's fairly well understood that directionally folks should move away from NPS, more towards CSAT, maybe even towards something more like, can they perform the task? And that the question should be asked in a continual manner across multiple services. So I think historically, customer success, product support, customer service, we've been on the front lines of instrumenting CSAT or NPS because of those moments of like, you had an interaction with a human, how well did they do in serving your immediate need? But we would argue that it actually is more pragmatic to measure whether it's your marketing surface, your product surface, both web and mobile, and then as well as maybe even your tech docs, your support surfaces. So if you can instrument checking in with your customers, especially as they digitally transform across the journey, and you can take that sentiment data and juxtapose it against your behavioral data. So what they click, where they click, and how they were feeling. And you reduce the context bias and you get actionable insights when you do that across the journey. I would suggest that a company actually have company level metrics around sentiment, that it's not just customer success, that the customer experience is everyone's job. It's product, it's engineering, it's marketing, it's CS. I think that the post-sales folks, whether that's support or success, are well positioned to help influence and orchestrate it and capture it and help quantify the themes for action, but that it's a team sport. And so I would actually almost push it to like the chief operations officer or someone who's very centrally minded about how do we make our brand better. And that it can be deconstructed into which function should, pick off at those themes. In my experience in doing NPS in a former life at Postman, we could see things that were related to the user experience of promoters and detractors. We could see people who were fine with the price, people who were not fine with the price, and people who had questions or clarifications about the performance. Actioning those insights was across product, marketing, and CX, but we were responsible for instrumenting it. So I think that we as a collective are a good team to orchestrate or instrument it in partnership with people like user researchers or product managers. But at the end of the day, that it needs to be a company level KPI.
And so you would put it right up there next to maybe revenue, retention.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, revenue and retention and sentiment, absolutely company level metrics.
Yeah, and just because maybe support or CS goes and collects it and distills it and reports on it doesn't mean that it's just a CS or support metric. Like you said, it's a marketing, it's product, it's engineering, it's everything, right?
And that's where you get a lot of like those of us who've seen a lot of different diagrams around capabilities, voice of the customer. Right. Effectively, like, what are the bugs? What are the features? What's coming in? We are an instant collection point for that sentiment. And we use case data, ticket data, account notes to quantify the symptoms that we feel. And so to the degree you can ask a highly structured question to go along with the unstructured sentiment that's coming in, really does give you qualitative like instrumentation. That you can tell when you make a product change, was it good, bad, or ugly, or you make a marketing campaign, how did it go? So that's part of why I look at the relationship of voice of the customer inside of product support and CS. And I think about how do we take that classification or that taxonomy and partner with the product team on having clarity around the use cases and the feature development, that they are symbiotic. And we should be looking at it holistically.
Yep. And what tools? People can use Sprig, right, to help measure.
Yes, you could use Sprig to do
Yeah.
that. Absolutely. We see so many professionals, in particular, product managers, user researchers, engineers, data scientists, but CS and CX professionals as well, because we've historically been responsible for CSAT and NPS, and also marketers. So grab Sprig. There's a free version. You can kick the tires, and progress into a web-based, maybe on your technical docs, ask the level of effort to install, or did this content meet your needs? What are you looking for? There's a lot of different templates that we have available that support the funnel or the journey, as well as the use cases or methodologies of how you collect qualitative insights at scale.
And Monish, at Mode, how do you guys, when you have CSAT responses come in, how do you distill them down? How do you report on them? How do you get them to the right teams, whether that's product or other teams? How do you guys do that at Mode?
We use Mode, interestingly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so we use Mode. So, I mean, not trying to do an upsell here, but that's one of the advantages we kind of have, because we do get some of the information in, like in our ticketing system, but then when we want to break that down, like for example, last week also we were running into this thing where we had like 20% of CSAT from customers for the whole quarter or something. It was, and we were trying to like kind of dissect into it, and we realized that it was about a particular product module, right? But then we were kind of also like, we were trying to be, let's play the devil's advocate here. Like, is this because they were unhappy with this module, or is there something else going on, right? Because it may not be just because a negative CSAT is given doesn't mean it's because that's the module they reported the issue on, right? And this often happens when customers don't leave notes in the CSAT. They just do a rating, and then if notes are always helpful, but if they don't, then we have to kind of do the legwork. So back to your question, we use Mode that way because since Mode is kind of hooked up to different systems, it enables us to go kind of like one level deeper than what your traditional, like a ticketing system would do. And we can do a little bit more analysis to find out like what exactly is it, because we do a little bit of tagging in our ticketing system. So we can do some reporting on tags. And then once we have that, we are able to distill that down into the relevant engineering team saying, hey, here's kind of like the themes that we're seeing from, the last couple of months, and here's what we need your focus on.
Cool. Makes sense. Yeah, Branch did something very similar, distilling it down and then getting it to the right folks. It was still largely it was the CS team that would really push it and drive it, but ultimately it was up to the individual teams to then act on it.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, when we think about the entire customer journey from pre-sales through implementation to post-sales support, CS, as well as marketing, customer marketing, what do you think, what are the kind of top things that you think about to maximize customer satisfaction throughout that entire journey? What can other people do or optimize to really give customers that delight?
I think there's a lot we can do. I'm just thinking back on my last couple of places where I worked, sorry. What I found successful is to sell the customer's story, right? And by that, what I mean is the sooner that crucial teams like customer success, especially, are plugged into a customer's journey from possibly the implementation time, the chances of your success significantly increase there. Because I've noticed, like, again, a very traditional way of probably, I want to say like 5-6 years back, is where every stage of a customer's journey is very disjointed. Like, you have your BDRs, then you have your sales team, then you have your services team. And then once your services finishes doing something, they just do like a one-page support handoff summary and then hand off to the customer. But that often becomes, especially now, because now this was back like 10 years ago, probably, when CSMs were not that, the CSM world was not very popular. But now that we have CSMs, the sooner you're able to plug in CSMs into the journey and even support, not just at the point where a customer is going live, but before that, right? And of course, you can't do this for every single customer. You have to pick and choose, maybe for your big ones, your enterprise ones. The sooner you can plug people in make them understand what the customer is trying to do, what's the problem they're trying to solve. More importantly, how does your product fill the hole at this customer's organization that makes it more easier for other teams at your organization to relate to problems when this customer has something. And I've seen some fantastic turnaround times from customers when especially teams like engineering and product are more invested in the customer's journey and not just considering it as one of the tickets that they need to work on. So that's my observation.
What do you think, Lisa?
I think at the end of the day, customer satisfaction relates to the value that they're getting in that moment. Are they getting value? And so understanding what it is that the software does that helps them either change the way they work, live, play. So really understanding that, like, what your product promises to help them do, and does it transform the way they do it. They came to you and signed up for your software or bought your software to help them do something. And so their satisfaction is increased the more quickly and easily you can help them transform to the reason they came to you. You know, so in my case here at Sprig, like they come to us because they want to make decisions faster. They want to have insights. They care. Sentiment matters to them, and they want to make a better decision about their brand, about their product. So I think that like measuring CSAT is one step, deconstructing it is another, leaning into that feedback because that will be an indicator of the value they want or expect, and then actioning it, right? Really actioning their feedback. Most people don't ask them a question if you don't plan to action it. So we do have to kind of coach people, remind people like, hey, you know, is that data that you can get somewhere else, or do you actually have to ask the question? And if you do need to ask the question, can you actually action it?
Like that. So collecting across surfaces is definitely the most important, and not just at the singular point of support, but rather across the different surfaces, deciphering and understanding that data and then getting it to the appropriate teams and then action is kind of the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Lisa, you talked earlier about kind of like the three main parts of delighting customers, supporting customers, and it was proactive like CS, it was reactive like support, and then it was also tech docs or just documentation in general. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on where tech docs come in, the advantages they can provide, any advice that you have for anyone as they're thinking about should they invest more in documentation?
Yeah, this one has been a really fun one for me to solve, having been in and around it in a couple different permutations in my career. And so I fundamentally believe there is a relationship from the product decisions that get made and how that gets translated into being support ready. And so I look at the tech docs person, and I, you know, shout out to all you folks out there that I learned from, Michael, Jackie, Nils, Ryan. There's a few of you, but like the relationship to the new decision of what gets built, and then how do you document it, and not just document it like once, but like make sure that your support people actually understand how to perform the task, and then therefore your users can self-serve. And so should that tech docs person, for example, be part of the product team? Should they be part of marketing? I'd say no. In that marketing has a job to do in terms of the copy they need to communicate. Most people come to docs and it should be task accomplishment. How do I perform the task? Don't sell me on it, just I want to perform the task. So in my opinion, tech writers and tech documentation is a critical role, and it is best when it is either part of your product team or part of your support team. So if they're part of the support team, they're interested in more self-serve and like, how do you, you know, keep people from writing in and having tickets? How do you expose product flaws? And so I really appreciate it when tech writing is part of the release process, and that you don't go live with something until there's an actual article that can express, you know, how that should behave, or why it's good, or what it should be used for. So I have a lot of lessons there. I probably should start writing them down. But I had a lot of people in the village kind of helping me learn more about that space. Didn't grow up as a tech writer.
Yeah. Monish, what do you think about tech docs, where they fit in, who should own them? Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So I have a very different outlook towards this, because I feel like, in my observation, I think we are, I think documentation is good. Let me get that out of the way. Documentation is needed, it's good. But I will also say, I think whether it's for good or for bad or worse, I think we live in a world where people just want to get things done, right? I just want to go in, I want to be able to use this tool. I don't want to waste time reading a bunch of documentation. Like that's a reality, right?
That's fair.
And I feel like what we are seeing, like, we've seen this at Mode multiple times, that I think the easier it is, the more intuitive it is, your product is, to set something up, to configure it without your customer having to context switch, the higher your chances of making them successful. And I think it's, especially for a lot of our enterprise SaaS applications, like for example, like I use Mode, we integrate with Okta, single sign-on and all that stuff. But what we're noticing is, like Mode comes into the picture sometimes at a later time in a customer's organization. They already have Okta, they already have something else, right? Now, and Mode caters to a specific persona, right? Like I'm somebody in the VP of analytics or something, like data scientists, right? But your IT folks who actually manage Okta, they're already doing their own thing, right? They don't care about, they have no love towards one particular application. They have to manage multiple things, right? To make their life easier, we have to give them documentation, which again goes back to help side. But again, the question becomes, do you expect IT teams to read through the help documentation of every single application they have to support, right? So that's why I was like, I think I have a different approach towards it. I think documentation is great. For people who want to read it. For support teams, it's good because they can send stuff to the customer. Like if a customer says, hey, I want to do this, what's the right way to do it? Send them the doc, right? But that shouldn't be your primary focus. Your primary focus should be make the product intuitive. And something interesting, I don't know if it's interesting or not, but good or bad, but at Mode, what we have is we don't have a team of technical writers for documentation. So a lot of our documentation is done by a product team. Where it gets interesting, most of the documentation that happens after a major release is actually done by the support organization, which is my team. And the reason we found that fairly successful so far is because we field questions from customers, right? We get to know what they want. So we are able to formulate the documentation they want. In fact, we just launched a whole FAQ on the Mode support site a couple of weeks ago, because we have a 2-year repository of stuff that customers have asked questions about. So yes, if you're big enough, absolutely, you can have a technical documentation or a writing team. But I also think support should be plugged into it, because we get a lot of the how-to questions, as opposed to just like, help articles where you go and configure stuff.
Yeah, and the support team is heavily incentivized to get the right information and right product changes out there to ideally reduce their workload, right? If they get 10 questions in a day about the same thing, they want to eliminate all 10 questions if they can. Lisa, you had a reaction to what Monish said earlier about support team owning docs. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, in an ideal state, your software, your UX is just perfect, and that no one needs to read anything, and it's all just super clear. But as we're pointing out, that's not always the case. Sometimes you do have to field the errant questions. And so my observation is that the support documentation or help centers are best when they're organized with the reactive motion, like, because they're incentivized to scale the one-to-many approach. And it also serves as sort of a checkpoint between the product releasing, whether you're releasing in a consumer fashion or you're releasing in an enterprise motion, B2B. But like having that not be with product and instead, or marketing, and instead be with support, really helps to ensure that like you're quickly getting the questions answered and informing the product that there is a gap on the decision that they've made, because now I have to serve up content that it specifically addresses this. So Our support team has access to also, we use README to update the docs. And we've oscillated between in terms of like dedicated tech writing and federated. In my opinion, dedicated works better and aligns with your branding, your UX branding, your tone, your voice. But there's a few ways to skin it. But if I could wave my wand, I would put the writing capacity and acumen inside of support, that they can use the voice of the customer data, sentiment at scale, to go fix up areas of the product by docs. Like, it's a reverse way to do it, right? You really want it into the product, but if you can't get in the product, then you can at least get it into docs.
Love that.
Can I add something, Mike?
Yeah, please do.
I was just going to say, I will also kind of, what do you call, play the devil's advocate on myself, because I think the problem with what I also said is because in terms of scalability, it becomes a challenge to have support involved in documentation. I mean, if you're small enough, it's fine, but it doesn't mean you can scale it, which is a problem we're actually running into today at Mode, because we have a lot of stuff, like I said, 2 years worth of data. It's on our, we've done our best to make it into FAQs, but we, believe it or not, just last week, we just started the discussion saying, who owns this, right? Is this one of those situations where nobody owns it, but everybody wants to have a say in it, right? So essentially what we're, at least, kind of giving a sneak preview of what's happening at Mode, what we're probably going to end up doing is we're going to keep our documentation focus on the help side restricted to more on the product side. And then since we've got such a lot of useful content coming in from customers saying, and especially we are in the, BI reporting world. So we have a lot of these, what's the best practice to do this? How do I build this kind of a report? We're going to take all of the support funnel questions, the FAQs of sorts, probably move it into like a community forum of sorts, right? Because then you have more of your customer engagement happening. Support can play an active role in that conversation, while your core product and documentation team continues to just focus on actually releasing, your help documentation, release guides, things that are like just needed for somebody to kick off using the product without having your help center, getting really convoluted with a lot of the FAQ things. So it has its pros and cons, but I feel like at some point organizations have to look at their documentation hub or whatever they have and decide if that's the right thing, or do we need to split it into kind of like a, community forum kind of thing and keep the help center more focused.
Love it. So why don't we shift gears a little bit to all the touch points that you have with customers. So tell me a little bit about, Monish, we'll start with you, and then Lisa, let's hear your thoughts. All the different ways you engage with customers. Monish, you mentioned earlier, you have the help center, you have intercom, which will be on your website. I think you also do email support, if I recall. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we've got a help site. We have email. So we have, for paying customers, we have our, email support, which comes into intercom. We also do in-app support as well. So, we within the Mode app, intercom is integrated. So it allows customers to just stay within the Mode app and just can open a ticket with us. We also do, in terms of channels when needed, we do, phone support. It's more outbound though. Excuse me, not inbound. We do phone support. And then from a security privacy standpoint, we don't have access to customers' data or their reports or anything. So essentially we do like a certain level of Zoom support as well. I say Zoom support, but more of like screen sharing support when we need to. Just easier to, do troubleshoot reports with customers. And most recently, what we're exploring right now is also the concept of, in fact, we're actually talking to Athena about this, is also to do Slack support as well for some of our bigger customers, because, over the last 2 years, like everybody's gone completely remote and Slack has kind of become your default messaging application of sorts. And, while in-app messaging is great, the problem with in-app messaging is it's always one-to-one, right? Because the person who's using your app, that person launches a chat and they chat with somebody on your support organization, right? But Slack has a significant advantage because you have the collaborativeness coming in, right? So, because we've seen this problem where somebody reports an issue with a report and they're like, hey, I'm reporting this for a user, let me get feedback from the other user, and the user has to get, and the user can't come into the in-app chat because the chat is between one person, right? So the user cannot access this person's chat. So what we're trying to do is solve that problem. Especially for our bigger customers, we're trying to solve it by allowing an integration with Slack and our ticketing system so that customers feel more comfortable pulling other people into conversations. And for them, it just becomes a natural conversation that we're having. And on the other side, it just becomes like a ticket. So to wrap it up, we don't do phone, but we do email, in-app, and very soon we'll be doing Slack and Zoom support for some of our bigger customers as well.
Yeah, you said something interesting the other day on the Slack piece, which is your customers, everyone is on Slack 24/7. Well, maybe not 24 hours a day, but they're on Slack. That's where they live. And pushing them to a help center, pushing them to the in-app chat. In-app chat can be really good if they're already there, but if they're already on Slack, it sounds like that's kind of where it seems that's where a lot of customers are getting more and more used to just being able to engage there. It comes with challenges though, right? Like what are you mentioned the challenges with in-app chat on something like an intercom where it's one-to-one and you can't loop in others and you have to be in the app to be able to start that. What are the challenges you're seeing or expecting on a place like Slack?
Yeah, so one challenge we're already noticing is to retain the Slack experience on the customer side. And by that, what I mean is if we close a ticket on the ticketing side, right? Like on the Slack side, they get a notification that ticket is closed, but we run the risk of somebody kind of continuing the Slack thread on the customer side without kind of knowing that the ticket is closed on our side. So there's a risk that yes, we do have a pop-up saying hey, this ticket is closed, do you want to reopen? But I mean, you never know, right? I mean, you're coming back from a PTO after 2 days, you don't read through the whole thread, you just go to the bottom of the thread, right? So we're trying to see how do we maintain that level of consistency without 20 messages passing in Slack and then the customer realizing, oh, I didn't realize Mode was not reading all these messages so far, right? So we're trying to maintain that consistency. Second thing, I don't know if it's going to be a challenge because we've not rolled this out yet in production, but what we are really eager to know is CSAT, because we do want to make sure, right, because we want to get that CSAT tracking done really effectively so that we know how customers are going to be happy with this. Because it's more, it's a more different kind of engagement on Slack. So, we don't know yet the CSAT capabilities of Slack plus our ticketing system. So that's number two. I think the last one for me, and there's more, but I think this is the one that probably comes to mind, is up-leveling my team. And by that, what I mean is when you're in an in-app chat, your customer sentiment is kind of different because everybody's kind of like used to, you open a chat ticket with any vendor and it takes maybe like 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get a response back, right? But when you're in a Slack conversation, you expect responses like instantly, right? Because for a customer, they're just chatting. They're not like opening a ticket, they're chatting. So what we are thinking about the Mode side is in terms of skill set, people don't want your traditional, information gathering questions because the people you're talking to on Slack is probably like really seasoned technical folks, right? So how do you continue to deliver quick, efficient, and sensible responses to customers on Slack while at the same time not overburdening your team as well? So that's something we're rolling it out for a couple of customers now. So we will know more soon.
Cool. And hopefully Athena helps with some of those challenges as well. Lisa, when we're talking about kind of all the different touch points, what are the touch points that you at Sprig engage with customers on? And what are the most valuable, most effective ones? And what are the kind of ones that you're seeing to be less effective or less interesting?
Yeah, I'll put a plug in for making sure as a CX product support leader that you understand the product's packaging, right? That you really clearly understand the dimensions of what features and functionality are available across what plan types, because depending on the plan type, there's probably a different level of effort that goes into the type of support that you need to service. So if I could wave my wand and go back in time for any of my career decisions, I would say that I wish I'd started off with having a better understanding of packaging, and then therefore even more clearly analyzing the support implications so that I could do the service levels. So the direct relationship between packaging, segmentation, and then therefore service levels. So moving forward to the service level conversation, when we think about free or low value paid plans, we want to be able to make sure that we can answer their questions via email. So they can reach us by support@Sprig. That wires up a case creation today in Salesforce, once upon a time in HubSpot. We at one point had in-app chat. And as we started to look at the margins, we realized we have this really great fit for top of market, and they're really enjoying these dedicated Slack channels that I'll get to in a minute. In-app chat, we paused that capability. And so we've experimented a little bit, and what we're landing on now is that we will have email support. We will return to having in-app chat, and we will do that via HubSpot. We'll turn that back on. So we'll have both chat and the email capability wired up in a conversational way through HubSpot. And if it requires escalation, we'll escalate it into the Salesforce case management system for additional triage and quantification back into that voice of the customer. And if it needs even more triage, like bug or feature, it'll go into Jira to hit the engineering teams. So email, in-app chat. What we have some more discussion to do is whether we will or we will not institute a Slack-based community or a community on some other technology. There's two different lines of rationale about this. On the one hand, if they're already in the product, you can get them help. Great. What I worry about actually is when they're not in the product, how do I reach them? I have something important to tell the free and low value folks. And they may not be on the channels like Twitter or LinkedIn to get the latest information from marketing. So what I do like, again, I'll get to in a minute, dedicated Slack channels for the top value customers. It guarantees me a place to connect with them. It also lets me scale in a different way by having a community, because then I also have the power of my engineering and marketing team to flank me if I have a resource deficit. So we still have some dialogue internally to do about will we, won't we on community. But let me just pivot for a moment to say something I wouldn't have said 2 years ago. And when I started at Sprig, we had offered dedicated channels, Slack Connect channels to our largest customers. And it's made such a world of difference in terms of intimacy and actioning in the way we are able to engage. We are just like an extension of their workforce. We've had to go so far as to make sure our names say Lisa at Sprig. We literally one time had a manager ping us and ask for performance feedback of someone in the workforce at the customer side. And we were like, she is great. We really enjoy working with her as her vendor, and like reinforce like that we are actually another company. And so we like quickly updated our identities. So we offer in the reactive motion dedicated Slack channels to the high value customers. And the challenge that we've had related to that is that scale, that task automation, that follow-up. Candidly, when you work for revenue officers, they're like, where are those meetings? Where are those emails, right? Activity drives pipe, pipe drives revenue. And I'm like, have you asked them to open up their Slack client? Like there's actually a lot of activity going on there and we can't measure it into the CRM. And so that's been really hard for me to quantify the level of differentiation that the customer success side has. Like we flanked them with product support for reactive, like onesie twosie questions. But then we've also, for those high value customers, not only do they get a dedicated Slack channel, they get a dedicated CSM. And so those two things really complement it. So what I'm looking to do is to take that goodness from top of market and figure out just enough for the free and like lower value customers that we meet them where they are when they're in the app, when they're not in the app. Can we get them to webinars? Can we get them to, come get the best of what else we have to offer besides just the product? So a couple of different levels of service that we provide. And we dabbled a little bit in professional services, but that's not our primary target. From time to time, we need to do a little extra lifting. We could see something like that down the road for our organization.
Two follow-up questions, one on in-app chat, one on community. On the in-app chat, let's start there. So you stopped doing it for a while. You're going to be re-implementing it using Spot. Are you going to be segmenting or tiering and filtering in-app chat to only certain tiers, or will everyone have access to that?
It is filtered, back to that packaging point in terms of like what are the plan types and feature types that tend to need an additional level of support, right? Is there something in your product that triggers more questions? Can you potentially reserve that just for your highest value? And so we will be segmenting based on like which plan are they on or what is their spend, for example.
And then on community, you said you're thinking about it. It is a good way to access kind of the higher volume, maybe free, low priced users. Something that I've observed over the years is that marketing messages via email have become less and less effective.
Correct.
Other channels like communities like Slack are increasing in effectiveness because it's a new channel. When you think about the community, what are the kind of pros and cons that you're thinking or weighing to decide whether or not to do it?
Yeah, what we first worried about is because we've historically operated in a dedicated context, that any identity information, so like, for example, if we are working on an API key or an environment ID in a model where you're in a community, like how do you care for that? We have observations from other community moderators where they have terms of use, but invariably someone does make a mistake and share the wrong information. And that can happen on Twitter and that can happen on LinkedIn. So it's not a unique problem, but it was first and foremost, sometimes what we have to share is a little bit private between the two companies. How are we going to do that? So we still have that outstanding question, but we think one of the ways to try to help mitigate it might be some type of terms of service, or some type of bot that helps say like, hey, let's take this elsewhere and get that information out of the channel and where it goes.
Cool. I know a number of companies that do communities very well at scale. So at any point, if I can be helpful, let me know. Okay, so final question, and we'll start with you, Monish. Curious your thoughts, and then Lisa will wrap up with you. You're still there. There you go. What advice would you have for support leaders, CS leaders out there wanting to maximize customer delight, but also recognizing the current environment where we're in, where budgets and headcount might be a little bit tighter than the past few years?
I think my advice, and I'm in no position to give advices, but I guess my sharing of experience of sorts is, especially from don't think about customer satisfaction anymore. Think more of customer experience. I think it's time to kind of flip the whole thing on its head, because as opposed to every organization out there going behind solving problems, I think we need to take an approach of how do we prevent these problems to begin with, right? And I know it's easier said than done, but what I really mean by that is, for customer support leaders out there, my advice would be, think of ways in which you and your organization can partner closely from a GTM side with, even if you can get partnership with product and engineering, you don't have to get partnership with your pre-sales and services, but at least product and engineering. Have a seat at the table where you can at least contribute and possibly even influence a roadmap. Share insights that you are seeing on the field. Take it back to product and engineering in a very actionable way. Don't just throw data at them, but make it actionable, explicitly calling out what you're seeing, what we want them to do. That, I think, especially in today's kind of like a scrappy environment, I feel like any product and eng leadership team would be more than happy to hear, like, what do you want us to focus on, right? As opposed to saying, my CSAT dipped by 70%. That doesn't tell me anything, right? But the more you can kind of loop back with your other teams and try and get ahead of possible problems, especially in today's world, I think that probably helps, like, build up that customer satisfaction aspect.
Cool. Love that. Lisa, final advice?
I very much agree with Monish. Be evidence-based, right? Have empirical evidence that the symptom, your theories can be backed up either by case volume, by quotes, I very much view product support and customer success as little mini research teams, that they're like collecting the insights at scale. And so to the degree that you can help make the product or the brand better, if you can come with data to support your rationale or your claim, be evidence-based. So start figuring out the way to categorize or quantify the types of things that you're seeing, and start to figure out how you can produce evidence about a symptom that needs to be corrected, irrespective of who it might be that needs to solve for it.
Wonderful. To recap some of the things I heard, a lot of great stuff today, but one of the things that was most consistent was to really drive change and customer satisfaction across the board. It's everyone's job. And in order to do it effectively, you first need to collect information, data, empirical evidence across many different services, not just at the point of product support. You need to categorize it, quantify it, and then from there you need to action on it and provide it back to teams in an actionable way. And you might collect feedback and inputs from customers in app chat, in email support, in your help center, in Slack, and all sorts of other places, but collecting it all through various different systems, getting it back to the team in a quantified way, then helps everyone kind of provide the best service they can to customers. Wonderful. Well, this was really fabulous. Lisa, Monish, want to thank you very much for your time today. It was wonderful hearing your thoughts, your experiences, and your advice from Sprig and from Mode. So really appreciate it.